Hello and welcome to BetterTech. I'm your host, Colin McCarthy, here to explore the dynamic world of tech with you. Over the years, I've seen firsthand how technology transforms business, and at BetterTech, we'll dive into those transformative trends, connecting with thought leaders to uncover insights that propel success and innovation. So let's get started with today's guest, Craig. Welcome to BetterTech. So let's start off with an introduction of yourself, what you've been doing, your job, and then we'll move on from there.
Hey, thanks for having me. My name is Craig Riddell. I am the field CISO here at Netwrix. I primarily specialize in our identity and access management portfolio. Just celebrated my 1-year anniversary with the company. Prior to coming here, I was the director of identity and access management for HP.
Wow, that must be quite a role and quite a challenge with the number of employees that HP have with identity and access management. Can you provide a brief overview of your experiences and expertise in the field of identity and access management and security?
Yeah, so I was really fortunate early on in my career to work with Tatya Lenin, who was the inventor of the SSH protocol. I got to do a lot of interesting work with our clients, getting really deep into identity, how they were using not only their interactive access, but also their machine-to-machine, their non-interactive access, which is the vast majority of what happens, in computing, and really how powerful an identity can be simply by being provisioned the wrong way. And I kind of just latched onto it and never got out of the rabbit hole.
Right. Yeah. It is interesting in today's adoption of zero trust that identity has really become the endpoint or the new endpoint. How would you define zero trust and its security model in the context of AIM, identity access management?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because I think a lot of really good identity practices that I've been around have always kind of followed this principle of zero trust without really having a label for it. The way that I view zero trust specifically in the context of identity and access management is really trust but verify. We know that a certain degree of access is going to be required to do your job. And if it's a higher level of access than your standard user, then we obviously trust you to perform those tasks. So it's not really zero trust, a little bit of a misnomer. It's more of I trust you, but I'm also going to verify that you're doing what you say you're going to do. And every step in the process to provision your account, to give it least privilege, to do all of those things was done properly as well.
Right. Yeah. I think the old principle of least privilege has never been as important as it is now. And I know there's a lot of moves for companies to really define their RBAC process, obviously role-based access control, and also just-in-time access. And as a lot of the memes have shown that I see on LinkedIn, zero trust is not really a product that you can buy. You can't sort of say that you bought zero trust and deployed it. It is very much a security model that always has to be evolved. Talking of zero trust and its model, what would you say are the key principles, and how do they differ from a traditional security approach?
Yeah, so like I said, in identity, it is kind of, there is a certain degree of trust, but I think where it really differs is getting into strong automation, like you said, like getting into a role-based or an attribute-based access control policy to where you don't just have an employee that's with a company for, 20, 30 years and snowballs permissions because they've been in various projects and stuff. Those permissions need to dynamically change with your employees as they move, as they evolve in their careers. And then also, like you said, just in time or even ephemeral access in certain situations, right? Accounts don't need to exist statically on endpoints anymore. So why do they? We can get into ephemeral access. We can get into true just in time. And oh, by the way, we also have other means of verifying your identity, right? We have very intricate MFA solutions now. We've got a lot of other specialized access tokens. We can go beyond just passwords. We can go into a lot of other access methodologies. and verify not only once, but continuously through this process, and then hopefully get into user behavior analytics and create a risk profile for you and baseline based on, what your role is in the company.
Right. Yeah. It's some of those key principles that you mentioned have really come to light in the last couple of months with the Okta incident. I won't call it a hack. I'll call it an incident or a breach where companies were protected due to those other restrictions placed on how the admin accounts could be signed into, even though their account was compromised or through the harvesting of those HAR files where people had the OAuth tokens and they were able to access those accounts. It's interesting how you mentioned about differences in MFA. What's your thoughts on hardware or physical security keys?
I think a strong FIDO2 program, if it's implemented correctly, is great. Of course, there's the human element of that. You have to worry about people losing them, misplacing them, shipping hardware tokens out, loss of productivity. There's those types of elements because, be honest, as a modern cybersecurity professional, it's no longer about just to adhere to my standards. It is also about partnering with the business as well, right? So we have to keep those types of things in mind. I would say it needs to be situational. There isn't a rubber stamp for multi-factor authentication. It needs to be what works best for you and your workforce. But certainly a strong FIDO2 program, I'm 100% for that if it makes sense.
Right. Yeah. Certainly for those key accounts, there's no reason for every, global admin, super admin, Okta admin not to have one of those keys to protect their account. And also, a few minutes ago, you were talking about companies having a good process in automation and the permissions they can have. I know the permission creep is a terrible problem that a lot of corporations have. They will have, say, a robust onboarding and hopefully a very robust offboarding process. But for those long-term employees, having a process where their permissions and access is reevaluated as they move, laterally through the business or, get a new position, change responsibilities. In my experience, a lot of companies don't have a very good movers process. A lot of admins will always talk about the JML, and they tend to, the joiners, movers, and leavers. They work on the joiners process. They work on the levers process, but the movers is always the very hardest one to really excel at.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think it's likely due to there's really not a lot of products out there that, number one, can handle, if you have an identity process and you're standing it up from the ground floor, you can set these processes very early. But if you're an established company and then you're looking to backfill and kind of re-engineer these processes, the only really good way to do that prior to some companies that are coming out with some interesting technology now was to throw a ton of money and resources at it, right? Like the old joke in IGA was really 3 million, 3 years, 3 connectors, right? And then you look at a company that has, thousands of applications, do the math, it's just not cost effective. The two biggest fields that I see really evolving that I think are the most fascinating. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff going on with access, credentialing, and tokening and stuff like that. That's interesting. But privilege access management and identity governance administration, some of the changes that are coming out from some of the innovators and disruptors in those spaces is really fascinating. The IGA, like I said, like you said too, right? It's we have a problem there. It's hard to untangle this ball of yarn once it's already tangled up. So you see a lot of companies that are leaning heavily into AI, or really more accurately machine learning, to do faster role mining, faster data gathering, so that we can set up the beginnings of that RBAC process and then tighten it down. Quicker time to value there obviously is a big thing. And then in the PAM space, they're almost bleeding over into IGA. A lot of future leading PAM vendors are getting into orchestration, where they can generate the accounts on the fly. A coworker of mine used an analogy that I stole, and I love it. And it's like you wouldn't call a taxi because you were going to go somewhere, maybe, right? So identity is kind of the same thing. Why should your account exist statically if you're not using it? That's kind of an interesting point. We no longer need to just manage the identity program or problem, especially around privileged identities. We can actually truly mitigate and shrink the attack surface. And that's a very interesting kind of different approach that I'm seeing out in the market.
Yeah, it's I'm sure you and I both know some of these emerging companies that are coming out with, unique, interesting ways of tackling this. It is interesting to see that it's such a growing space. IGA, and the other term I keep hearing is SSPM, SaaS Security Posture Management. The other big player to sort of protect your identity. When we're looking at a lot of these tools, and I've discussed this with some of the other guests that we've had on, there can be a terrible problem of companies buying a product to try and fix a problem that they don't fully understand. So, what's the best way to sort of evaluate these specific security challenges that can be tackled with Zero Trust?
I'm going to say something that maybe a lot of people might not agree with, and some people might. And I've sat on both sides of the table. I've been the consultant and I've been the consumer, right? The practitioner. I think you have to hold your vendors to a higher standard. Very likely you're buying your software through a VAR. You're probably not buying it direct through the software vendor. What value add is that reseller having? Are they talking to you about your strategic technology investments? Do those things integrate? Should they talk to each other? Are your strategic vendors are talking to each other on a regular basis? Are their companies growing in the same direction that you want to take your identity strategy or your technology strategy or security strategy in general? I don't think that we do enough reverse interviewing on the practitioner side. I think what we do is we kind of look at the technology stack that we have, and instead of going back and saying, hey, we have a gap here, we have these technologies, can you work together to help address it? Like you said, we go look to add another piece to the pile. When technology has evolved vastly, probably from the time you implemented all of these solutions that you're trying to bolt onto, it may be way worth it to go back out to the market and see what's out there. That can be scary for a lot of people, but I think that's the way that you truly enhance your cybersecurity program.
Exactly. I agree 100% with what you're saying. I've seen companies try and shoehorn in the wrong solution or not the correct solution into an existing process or practice or tooling that they have, rather than taking the incredibly bold step of re-engineering the entire operation, the entire company, to utilize better tooling more efficiently. And obviously that's just a huge transformational project that a lot of companies might not have the appetite for risk, or the skills to take it on, or sometimes the budget. It can be very difficult.
And I mean, I think that is something that we as, cybersecurity professionals kind of evolving as our careers have demanded of us. We are starting to write ROI use cases for our cybersecurity investments and lean business cases. And we're setting up long-term budgeting to say, hey, here's the upfront cost of replacing solution A, but here's the increase in efficiency that we get through the workforce. Here's the increase that we get through a reduction in infrastructure tax. It's a modern service, so it's more resilient. Here's the cybersecurity benefits we get. We're not typically not used to speaking across all of those spectrums, right? We're used to just saying, here's risk, here's how we reduce or mitigate this risk. Is this acceptable to you, yes or no? But our demand of our job is evolving. And I think I do see that. And I think that a good VAR does kind of help bridge that gap. And it is hard to evaluate every new piece of technology that's out there. So having a good partner does help a lot.
Yeah, for sure. And it's not just siloing in, this problem being a security one. it is the whole tooling that the organization uses. I feel, it's their primary identity they're using, whether it is Azure AD or Entra AD as it's called now, even Active Directory, if they're still utilizing that, if they've moved to Okta or Google using a Google Cloud identity. And then it goes into their collaboration platform and all of the other risks that they have around shadow IT and the sprawl of SaaS applications the companies end up having because end users want to use the tools that make their life easier. They're often not doing it, to the annoyance or to annoy the security department or the cybersecurity team or their managers. I don't think they're doing it maliciously. They're just doing it because they prefer to be working in those tools, and it's so easy to gain access to those tools with a Microsoft 365, OAuth login or a free trial that they sign up with, or signing in with their Google account. Obviously, end users are under an incredible barrage of advanced threats, and there's always the problem of ransomware and other problems inside the business. What specific aspects of zero trust do you think that organizations should focus on to help protect themselves?
Like I said, the on the identity side, the trust but verify, you have to recognize that every cybersecurity program has a human element, and not everybody in that human element is a part of the cybersecurity team, right? So you need a way to reduce that human element down to an acceptable factor, right? And we do our best to do email filtering, we do our best to do all of that stuff, but at the end of the day, mistakes happen. Some of the stuff is out there is pretty clever. I think the way that you do that is strong configuration management, strong baseline. Here's how systems should look. If they start to drift from this, let me know. Strong privilege access management, and then definitely on the lower tiers of like help desk and user recovery and all of that type of stuff. If it makes sense, if you have the technology stack to do it, I would highly recommend leaning into something like an ephemeral access solution, something like that, where you don't have to have that, that static account that is, that's, be honest, that's what happens. You can get into the environment through a bunch of different ways, but eventually you're going to hop laterally until you find something of privilege, and then you're going to set up your shop, right?
Yeah.
Controlling those credentials is the cornerstone of everything, in my opinion.
Yeah, if I think back to all of the big headline compromises that have happened in the last 18 months, 2 years, I don't think any of them have been a traditional, Hollywood hack. I don't think there's been any, USB drives dropped in the car park, Mr. Robot style, and hoping that an employee is going to pick it up and plug it in. It's all been through compromised identities, whether it's, phishing or another compromised piece of software on somebody's personal device and then they're using that to access corporate accounts, and then their username and password have been harvested. I think that's how LastPass were compromised last year through an engineer's personal computer that had a compromise on it. Obviously, we're talking about zero trust, and a lot of that is about moving away from your on-premise infrastructure and utilizing the cloud more and more. And cloud migrations can be done the right way, and they can be done, the wrong way. When we're looking at identity, how should companies be adopting zero trust to secure their access in all of these cloud environments?
I think when you look at the cloud, the stuff that I start to think about is really, do I have the right tooling for it? I think a lot of companies have learned this lesson the hard way. Just because it works on-prem doesn't mean it's necessarily going to work up there. So, and then the second thing is not getting sucked into the void of the cloud service providers' free tools. Some of them are fantastic, but if your company grows and you adopt a multi-cloud strategy and you're only used to using AWS specific tools or Azure specific tools, and then all of a sudden you have to work in GCP or another cloud provider, all of a sudden you become very behind the learning curve. I prefer cloud agnostic approaches. It's that keeps the total cost of ownership very low. It's easier for the end user to consume, all of those types of things. And then going back down to the core tenets of what we should do as identity professionals, do you have just enough permission to do your job?
Mm-hmm.
Are you supposed to be on this endpoint? But then also, is this endpoint even supposed to be there? Because let's not forget that as public cloud is, ramped up, we've also lost our provisioning process. Cybersecurity used to be a stamp in that provisioning process if you were going to stand up a physical server. That's not there now. So the other question is also, is this workload that you're trying to connect to even something that should be there, right? So it does add that other layer of complexity there, and a strong cloud entitlements program too. So a good KIM solution is needed as well.
Right. What was that? You said KIM?
Yeah, Cloud Entitlements Manager. I think it's CIEM.
Okay, so can you just describe that for me a little bit?
Yeah, so if you have like native permissions inside of your identity or inside of your AWS, so you have like AWS IAM roles, for example, you can look at that as a way to analyze your cloud identity security and see if, do I have any accounts that are over provisioned? Do I have people who have access to certain roles that they shouldn't have access to? It's just another way to work inside of those cloud solutions, to make sure that the same way that we have access to an account today that may not truly be provisioned, but we can hop to get to one, and a good tool will show you that. The KIM solutions will show you the same thing. Hey, Craig may not have a privileged account, but he does have access to this role, which then could do this, which then could do that, and then it could get to a level of privilege. So he should probably be a part of your PAM solution, or you should correct this problem, right?
Right. Okay. And that's just one of the standard best practices that you'd recommend an organization look to adopt?
Especially if it's an organization of size. I mean, like, obviously there is that, like you said, cost is a factor. And if you're in the mid-market or SMB space, it might not be something that you necessarily need to invest in right now. You're probably getting a lot of your solutions through whatever you've used for access management. When you start to get into maybe using a lot more of the cloud features, and that you see a hyperscale, and it really becomes important to manage these identities at that scale, and you're not just using the native consoles or the APIs. That's really where I see the benefit of having these tools. At a smaller scale, you can do everything through the cloud provider.
Right. Okay. Earlier on, you mentioned AI, because every podcast in 2023 has to mention AI at some point. And obviously, you correctly termed it as machine learning or large language modeling. I know that this new technology stack that we have is really going to help with the detecting and the reporting and responding to security threats. How effective do you think that will actually be within Zero Trust and identity and access management?
I think it has to. I mean, identities are just going up, right? The number of service accounts. And I mean, if you start to think about manufacturing specifically, everything has an identity, right? Everything that is on your network. So our identity problem, quote unquote, or risk is going to only exponentially increase. I think the human element can only scale so far. We need to modernize our tools, especially like we were talking about role-based and attribute-based access. We need a faster time to value in that, especially if we're going to add more pieces to the puzzle. So I think, I mean, you can see it in the innovation that's coming out in the industry. I think it's going to be a very, very key component to the way that we change in the next 2 to 3 years for sure.
Right, yeah. And obviously Zero Trust has come a long way in the last few years. It's become very much an IT buzzword. I'm sure it's on every admin's buzzword bingo board game that they're playing secretly in meetings. And I know that Google have been operating on the Zero Trust security model since, I think, 2014, when they published a paper about Beyond Corp, what they referred to it as. That was almost 10 years ago. What do you think is going to happen in the coming years? What do you think will be evolving with regards to Zero Trust, especially when we think about identity and access management?
I think you're going to, number one, I think you're going to reduce a lot of the human element. So right now we do place where I think of the trust chain and identity is like, did you offboard that person the right way? Or is their account still existing somewhere? Are your systems integrated enough, or are you still using local accounts that require some sort of manual intervention, right? How up to date is your inventory? Those types of things. I think the way that identity is kind of progressing, the automation there is going to take care of a lot of, offboarding issues. The joiners problem that we talked about earlier,
Yep.
That should be addressed by, making it cost effective to actually implement those solutions. And then on the PAM side, I think there's going to be more demand for things like, really truly controlling what commands certain levels of users can execute. Getting into, like I said, removing the static accounts where it makes sense, getting into ephemeral management, and a high degree of identity verification. I think multi-factor authentication is a beautiful idea and concept, but the way it's implemented at most companies is, hey, we don't want MFA fatigue. We don't want to blow up our users. So we're going to have them use their token once a day, and then they're authenticated, and we're not going to bother them again. And we have every intention to put in some sort of user behavior analytics later, but later's a hard sell when you're considering budget cycles and everything else, right? So I think we have to find a way to, and there are some interesting technologies that are trying to do this. We have to find a way to more rigorously make sure that it is who it says it is without really bothering the human. And like I said, there's some interesting ways to do that, but it's not really widely adopted yet. I think that's really where the massive leaps for zero trust are going to come.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting how you talk about that MFA fatigue, because there are a lot of companies will, whether they're on Google Workspace or if they're on Microsoft 365, depending on the SKU they're on, will have some really good additional security measures that they can put in place, whether it's context-aware access or identity access. I can't remember the other. I can't remember what Microsoft call it. EDS. What's it called? Enterprise Discovery Services or something. Where you could do endpoint verification on the device and a lot of posture management stuff. But I know a lot of companies won't deploy them because of the fear of increased support desk tickets, overstressing, overburdening the support desk, alienating end users or crippling end users and not allowing them to, giving them instant access or almost seamless access to the tooling that they need. It's a very, very delicate balance of balancing, access and security. And I think a lot of companies excel at it incredibly well. In the Okta breach, I read a lot of articles from Beyond Identity and also Cloudflare. They posted a lot of information about how they're protecting their account. So obviously it can be done, but it is a struggle as we both know. The one big problem that a lot of these breaches have caused, and when you and I are thinking about security, is all about data privacy and all of the regulations that they have. How do you think Zero Trust can help with that and assist organizations in maintaining compliance?
Yeah, I talk about this a lot too, right? Data breach versus data leak. You kind of like what you said earlier, like it's been a while since we've had a true Hollywood kind of thing. I think a lot of the stuff that we read in the news is misconfiguration, and it calls into question for me, is it a breach if it's configured wrong and I can just see it? I mean, I know it's yours, but you put it out there and didn't set it up right. So I think that's where the other side of that equation comes in too, is we have to have something, like I said, that human element. Is this configured the right way? Is my data classified the right way? Is it tagged the right way? Is it protected with those tags accordingly? Right? Not publicly available, like S3 buckets and all of that type of stuff, So it's that verification step. We talk about this all the time. Policies are only as good as their enforcement. Tons of companies have amazing policies with zero enforcement, so it's functionally worthless. I had a really, really fortunate time working for Joanna Berkey, who was the CISO when I was at HP, and she always advocated for making security a part of your corporate culture. And really what she meant by that was, if I can go to you as a business unit and say, I will be better at my job if we collaborate, because this security will be built in instead of bolted on. Your process will run more smoothly, and we're both going to look great, right? That's the reality behind a lot of these cybersecurity challenges. But what we end up with is, hey, we already did this thing. Can you help us make it secure? And then it's hard. That's where the gaps come from. So we need to be brought in a little bit earlier. That's where the verification side comes in. Like you said earlier in the podcast, kind of tearing down silos. I think all of that leads into zero trust. So it's not only just, writing down great standards. It is also about, implementing them. It is about spreading awareness through your organization and getting everybody on the same page.
Right. Yes, it is the partnership between the business and IT and security needs to be a proper partnership. There needs to be open doors. There needs to be, a willingness to listen to each other. Security is a team sport, because you can't do it alone, and there isn't a single piece of, there isn't one piece of software or a whole suite of pieces of software that is going to, solve it for you. It really does require, as you say, on the end user, and participation and collaboration across all, and getting those business leaders to buy in as well, and treat it as a part of the culture. Yeah, it's very good stuff. Looking to 2024 and your crystal ball as we get towards the close of the podcast here, what would you see are the emerging technologies that might further enhance and complement zero trust? And also, what would be your, if there was a real Santa Claus, Father Christmas, what would you like them to give you for Christmas with regards to security technology and also these all emerging technologies in the coming years?
I would like to see a lot faster. I'd like to see a couple of these companies that I said around identity in the IGA space that I see really leaning into ML. I would like to see them kind of come to the forefront as their time to value. I think what you're likely going to see is they get bought and acquired, and then that engine gets added into already industry leaders, which, whatever, as long as it actually works, I'm fine with. But leaning further into machine learning in the IGA space so that we can actually fully deploy the solution would be a big win in the identity space. And then, like I said, really looking at our privileged access programs. We have a lot of very cool bells and whistles in PAM solutions, but I question truly how often are they used? How scalable are your solutions? And is that the reason why you have gaps in them? When's the last time that we really evaluated that market and redefined the criteria that we kind of judge it by, I guess? As we start to see, all the big vendors in that space talking about ephemeral access, going beyond just in time.
Yeah.
And then I would see the next evolution of that is, like I said, some sort of form of continuous multi-factor authentication, or something that doesn't bother the human, something that says, like, if you have these things and you're in your security risk baseline, you're probably who you say you are. And if you don't, then I'm going to bother you. Something like that. I would think those would be my top three wishes.
Yeah, I'm just imagining what that would look like. when we go to a bank to open a new account, obviously we have to take an official form of ID. If you go to the DMV, to renew your driving license, you've got to take 6 points of ID. If we could do that in the physical world, it should be easily possible in the virtual IT world to do that. I'd be very interested to see what that would physically look like.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's some prototype stuff that I've seen that's out there. It's like an app on your phone that's running, or you have 2 points of contact, like an Apple Watch in your phone, or some stuff that's interesting that's going on with the cameras where it can do a scan of your face and like, yep, that's not a picture, that's who you say you are, so we're going to leave you alone. We talk about all these conveniences like single sign-on and all these things, and they're awesome, productive measures. And MFA was kind of the answer to a lot of the challenges that those things presented in the security space. We're like, well, hey, we're just not going to prompt people for passwords anymore. It's fine. We'll multi-factor authentication them. That's pretty inconvenient too, right? So we need to find a good balance. And that's the really exciting part about my job, is getting to talk about a lot of this stuff with companies and find out not only like, hey, where are you trying to go from your identity strategy point of view, but like, where's your company trying to go? How are your users accessing these solutions, and making sure that we have the right feel for the level that you want to be at.
Yeah. It is, as you say, it's very exciting. It's going to be very, very interesting to see where it goes. I've really enjoyed talking to you, Craig, for the last 35 odd minutes. Any closing Jerry Springer style closing thoughts?
No, I think I say this lovingly. I think identity and access management was kind of a lost art in cybersecurity. COVID being a tragedy, it did bring identity back to the forefront of a lot of conversations, because all of a sudden we were faced with a lot of problems that, we just had a company policy. Hey, you can't work from your house. Come into the office and we can secure that. Well, oops, we have to change everything. You saw it really easy, right? Companies that focus more on, hey, do we know who the person is? They pivoted pretty well. And then companies that were just like, no, we're going to lock down our controls, and they had a hard time, right? So I think finding a good balance, because the world has changed. We've all admitted that. And we do have to now evaluate, like, hey, we know cybersecurity is on the forefront of most people's minds nowadays, but we also can't slow the business down to an unacceptable level, because that's how we all get paid, right? So
yeah,
we have to be strategists. We have to be diplomats. We can't no longer just be enforcement.
Yeah, and it will some of those old technologies, it will be great to see them go. Maybe 2024 will be the slow demise, or start the demise of VPNs, and get rid of them. And hopefully by the end of the decade, there'll be no more VPNs.
Oh, hey. Woo.
That's what I'm going to ask for Christmas. No more email attachments, and no more VPNs.
I'm there with you. Let's do that.
Brilliant. Well, thanks again, Craig. It's been great talking to you.
You too as well. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays. Bye-bye.
Bye.